Morning, students. I wanted to discuss the topics that we actually covered in class for today's lecture. And we actually discussed overall a big picture of what we covered in IB Physics. So last year we covered topic 1, measurements and uncertainties, and that basically has to do with how we measure data, and then when we get data measured, how many sig figs do we take it out to, and what are the uncertainties that we associate with both analog and digital equipment. We didn't discuss that explicitly, but we will be actually looking at that very carefully when we look at the internal assessment. Next, the topic that we covered after that, we really spent the bulk of the year covering mechanics, and there are 4 sub-areas of mechanics. We have topic 2.1, which is motion. Motion, topic 2.1, is the thing that we really dug into and reviewed in class today. So we looked at all these different ideas here. We talked a little bit about graphing, a little bit about kinematics equations, and we spent a considerable amount of time reviewing concepts and doing problems. Next time we meet, and these are the equations that we actually wrote down, the relevant equations are right here, V equals ut plus at, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We actually labeled what these variables mean in real life. So that was the first part of what we did. And then just to kind of keep it consistent, the second part of lecture really focused, I'm just typing what I'm saying, on graphing. And we actually looked at position plots, velocity plots, and acceleration plots. One important point that we want to emphasize is that we reviewed the idea that the area under the velocity graph tells us the displacement. And when we were talking about displacement, we remembered to connect the letters in our graphs to the letters or the variables that we use in our kinematics equation. So these are the 4 key kinematics equations here. We discussed those. We did some practice problems in our slide deck, which you can actually also see as another attachment. And then we spent the second half of class reviewing graphs, how graphs work, how we use them in physics, and we covered specifically constant velocity graphs and also steady acceleration graphs. A discussion of drag or air resistance and drag forces will be done when we get to topic 2.2, which is forces. So that was kind of the bulk of the physics part. But in the beginning of lecture, I also summarized that we covered forces last year, which we'll be doing next week as a review. We covered the topic of, again, here's the equations. We covered energy, work, and power. And finally, we covered momentum and impulse. So those are the main topics that we covered from mechanics. And then in circular motion, we covered the notion of centripetal acceleration, centripetal type force, and we also discovered we discussed Newton's universal law of gravitation, and we talked a little bit about Kepler's laws, which is how planets go around the sun, and how satellites go around the Earth, and some of those relevant laws. So that was a summary of last year. And again, just to be very clear, what we dug into specifically in class was topic 2.1, mechanics. And you can see the slide deck is another attachment. And I've got a summary of, I've got some homework problems, and I'll be going over those homework problems in a separate set of videos that will be ready for you when you come to class on Monday with the homework complete.